Clara Rivers had worked at the Grand Lion Hotel for almost 3 years. Every morning she tied her hair into a neat bun, put on her white apron and smiled at guests who never really saw her. They looked past her as if she were part of the furniture, just another worker carrying trays and clearing tables. She didn't mind anymore. Or at least she told herself she didn't. She needed the job. It paid for her small apartment and her mother's medicine. She moved quietly between tables, careful not to make noise. The hotel was famous for serving important clients, politicians, actors, and business tycoons. The rule was simple: be invisible, never interrupt, never draw attention. Clara had learned that well, but sometimes, while polishing glasses or arranging cutlery, she would hum softly to herself, little tunes her father had taught her long ago. Her father had been a pianist, not a famous one, but one who loved music deeply when she was a child. Their house was always filled with melodies. The old piano stood by the window, and every evening her father played while the sunset poured golden light across the keys. He used to lift her onto his lap and guide her small fingers, saying, "Music is not about notes, Clara. It's about heart." Those words never left her. But life had changed suddenly. Her father fell ill, and the hospital bills drained everything. After he passed away, Clara sold the piano to pay the rent. She stopped playing altogether, saying it hurt too much to touch the keys without him there. The silence that followed was heavy, like a door closing on a dream. Now, years later, her days were filled with the clinking of dishes, the hum of conversations, and the faint music that played from the hotel speakers. She would sometimes pause when she heard piano music in the background, letting her heart ache for a moment before getting back to work. That morning had started like any other. The sun spilled through the tall windows, guests were finishing their breakfast, and Clara moved table to table with her usual grace. She noticed a group of executives in sharp suits sitting near the piano in the corner. They were talking about some big event that night, something about a business dinner, contracts and millions of dollars. She didn't understand the details, but she understood the tone: stress, importance, pressure. As she cleared a nearby table, she heard one of them say, "Everything has to be perfect tonight." "The deal depends on it." Clara glanced at the grand piano gleaming in the corner. The hotel's regular pianist, Mr. Henley, was testing the keys. He was good, confident, and charming, the kind of musician her father admired. For a brief second, Clara imagined sitting there again, her fingers moving across the ivory keys, the music flowing freely, but the thought felt foolish. She was just a waitress now, and that was all. Still, she couldn't help herself. When no one was looking, she whispered the melody her father used to play. Her lips shaped the sound without words. The tune was soft, gentle, and full of memories. It made her smile, a small, sad smile. "Clara, focus," her manager called from across the room. She blinked, quickly gathering plates. "Yes, sir," she replied and went back to work. Her humming stopped, but the music stayed alive in her head, beating softly beneath the noise of the day. The Grand Lion Hotel was always alive with energy, but Clara often felt alone in the crowd. The guests had their conversations, the chefs shouted in the kitchen, and the sound of cutlery echoed through the hall. But Clara's world was quieter inside her. It was filled with the echoes of piano keys, a rhythm only she could hear. Sometimes, when the day ended, she would sit in the empty dining room for a minute before going home. The lights would be dim, the air cool. She would rest her hands on the edge of the piano, never daring to press a key. She didn't want to break the silence. She would just close her eyes and imagine her father sitting there, nodding to her to start playing. "Go ahead." "Clara," she imagined him saying, "play something from the heart." But she never did. She would sigh, whisper goodnight, and leave. That night as she left the hotel, the city lights flickered on the wet pavement. A street performer played violin near the bus stop. The tune drifted through the cold air, soft and lonely. Clara stood for a moment listening. A part of her wanted to join him, to sit beside him and play the harmony. But she didn't. She turned away and boarded the bus, her apron folded in her lap. At home, she made tea, turned on the small radio, and closed her eyes as the music filled the silence. It reminded her that music still lived in her. It just needed a reason to come out again. And that reason, though she didn't know it yet, was coming soon. Life was quietly arranging its own melody for her. A moment when the invisible waitress would no longer be invisible, when her forgotten song would return and change everything. The girl who once silenced her music was about to remind the world what true passion sounds like. All it needed was the right moment, and one broken piano to start it all. The next evening, the Grand Lion Hotel buzzed like a beehive. Chandeliers glowed above white tablecloths, waiters hurried between tables, and every staff member felt the weight of one phrase whispered through the hall. The billion-dollar dinner. It wasn't just another event. It was the kind of night that could make or break the hotel's reputation. Clara stood near the service counter, clutching her order pad. She'd been assigned to the back row of tables, close enough to serve drinks but far enough to stay invisible. Her manager, Mr. Kenton, strode past with his usual scowl, barking instructions. "No mistakes tonight, no noise, no delays," he warned. Everyone nodded like soldiers before battle. The dining hall gleamed like a movie set. There were fresh orchids on every table and a polished grand piano in the corner. Waiting for its musician, the hotel's owner had even flown in special glassware from Italy. That piano caught Clara's eyes again. Its black surface reflected the golden lights. The same piano she'd touched gently after hours, as if afraid it might remember her. As the guests began arriving, the air changed. Limousines lined the street outside. Photographers snapped pictures, and inside, the waitstaff moved like clockwork. Clara tried to stay focused, but her curiosity tugged at her. She heard bits of conversation from the men in suits. Words like merger, proposal, and board approval. These weren't just businessmen. They were two powerful CEOs from rival companies, coming together for a deal worth billions. The hotel's regular pianist, Mr. Henley, sat at the grand piano, his tuxedo crisp, his fingers gliding effortlessly over the keys. The sound was smooth, elegant, perfect background music for expensive smiles. The executives nodded approvingly. Wineglasses clinked and laughter echoed. It was all going exactly to plan until it wasn't. Clara noticed at first a faint cough between notes. Mr. Henley's hands slowed. His face paled. He tried to keep playing, but his fingers shook. A second later, he stopped completely, pressing one hand against his chest. The room fell silent. A few guests gasped. The music ended mid-song, and that silence felt like thunder. "Call the paramedics," someone shouted. Waiters rushed forward. The pianist slumped on the bench, breathing hard. Within minutes, he was escorted out by hotel staff, safe but clearly unable to continue. The manager's face turned red. "What do we do now?" he hissed, glancing around in panic. The music was gone and the mood began to shift. The executives whispered, frowns forming. One man muttered, "This is unprofessional." Another checked his watch impatiently. The billion-dollar dinner was crumbling, not because of food or service, but because of silence. Clara froze near the back wall. Clutching a tray of empty glasses, her heart pounded. She could feel the room sinking into awkwardness. Every instinct told her to stay still, to keep her head down, but deep inside something stirred. Her father's voice, quiet but clear, echoed in her memory. "Music can fix what words can't." "Clara?" She looked toward the piano, still open, still shining under the chandelier light. Her fingers tingled as if remembering every key. The manager's voice broke her trance. "Does anyone here play?" "Anyone?" he barked. No one spoke. No one moved. Before she could stop herself, Clara whispered, "I can." Mr. Kenton spun around. "What did you say?" I can play," she said again, her voice trembling. A few waiters turned, surprised. The manager frowned. "You? Clara? You're a waitress, not a performer." "I know, sir," she said softly, "but if you let me try, just until someone else arrives." He rubbed his forehead. Clearly desperate, the guests were starting to complain. "Fine," he said through gritted teeth. "Go, but if this goes wrong—" "It's your job," Clara nodded, her heart hammering. She walked slowly toward the piano, feeling dozens of eyes follow her. She could hear whispers. What's she doing? Is she serious? A waitress? But she didn't look up. Her hands hovered over the keys, shaking. The ivory was cool under her fingertips. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes. The first note came like a sigh, soft and uncertain. Then another, smoother. Then the melody began to bloom. It wasn't a song from any playlist. It was hers. The one her father used to play on quiet evenings when life still felt kind. The music filled the room gently. The sound wrapped around the clinking glasses, the murmurs, the tension, and melted them all away. The chatter stopped, heads turned. The two CEOs who had been glaring across the table slowly relaxed. One leaned back, listening. The other smiled faintly. Clara didn't see them. She wasn't thinking about guests or billion-dollar deals. She was back in her father's living room, small hands on the piano, sunlight spilling across the keys. For the first time in years, she wasn't invisible. When she opened her eyes, she saw the reflection of the chandelier shimmering on the black surface, and beyond that, dozens of people standing still, utterly silent. The crisis that had almost ruined the night was over, though Clara didn't yet know she had just begun something far greater. A night that would echo far beyond that hotel. A night that would prove that even a forgotten waitress could hold the power to change everything. One note at a time. The soft sound of the final note still hung in the air when Clara lifted her fingers from the piano. For a moment, the whole world seemed to stop. The guests, the waiters, even the clinking glasses. Everything froze in stunned silence. It was as if her music had taken the air itself and held it still. Then slowly someone began to clap, another followed, and soon the room filled with applause. The executives who had moments ago been tense and impatient were now smiling. Their anger had melted away, replaced by something warmer. Admiration, surprise, maybe even gratitude. Clara stood awkwardly, her hands trembling. She didn't know what to do. Should she bow? Should she leave? Her heart raced. She had only meant to help, to fill the silence until someone else could take over. Now everyone was staring at her as if she had just done something miraculous. Mr. Kenton, the manager, hurried toward her. His expression was hard to read, somewhere between disbelief and awe. That was unexpected, he muttered. Stay by the piano, Miss Rivers. Don't move until I say so. She nodded quickly, sitting down again, trying to hide her shaking hands. The pianist had been taken to the medical room. The dinner continued, but now Clara was the centerpiece. Each time her fingers touched the keys, the conversations flowed more easily. The executives who had been glaring at one another now spoke with relaxed voices. Laughter returned. The heavy air of competition had turned into something that almost felt human. Clara didn't understand business or deals, but she could feel the shift. The music had changed the room. It had turned strangers into people again. Her melody, one born from love, loss, and memory, had done something that words and contracts couldn't. At one point, one of the company heads, a gray-haired man with sharp eyes, approached the piano during a break. Where did you learn to play like that? He asked. His tone wasn't casual. It carried genuine curiosity. Clara blinked, caught off guard. My father taught me, sir, she said quietly. He was a pianist. The man smiled faintly. He must be proud. Then he turned to walk away, leaving Clara speechless. She didn't know that man's name. But later she would find out he was one of the most powerful executives in the room. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, the hotel's owner had arrived, anxious after hearing that the pianist had collapsed. When he saw Clara playing, he froze. Watching her with wide eyes, the manager rushed to explain. She's one of our waitresses, sir. Stepped in when we had no one else. The owner said nothing for a long time, then simply replied, keep her playing. As the night went on, Clara lost herself in the music. The fear faded, replaced by something lighter, freer. Every note carried a piece of her heart, and every melody painted a memory of her father. The guests didn't know her story. They didn't know she worked double shifts to pay rent, or that she sometimes skipped dinner to send money to her sick mother. All they saw was a young woman whose music made them feel something they hadn't expected to feel that night. By the end of the dinner, the deal that had been on the verge of collapsing was signed. The two CEOs shook hands with genuine smiles. Reporters captured the moment, calling it a historic merger sealed over harmony. Clara didn't know any of that. She only knew that when she finished her final piece, the applause was louder than before. A few people even stood. She blushed and lowered her head, tears stinging her eyes. When the crowd finally began to leave, Mr. Kenton approached her again. His usual strict tone had softened. You did well, Clara, very well, he said quietly. The CEO himself asked to speak with you later. Her heart skipped. Me? She asked, but why? You'll see, he said with a small smile. Go home now, get some rest. You've earned it. As she walked home that night, the city lights felt different, warmer somehow. The cold air brushed her face, but inside, her chest burned with something fierce and alive. For the first time in years, Clara didn't feel like a forgotten waitress. She felt like the girl who once believed music could heal anything. The same girl her father used to call his little Melody. She didn't know yet that her simple act of courage, sitting at that piano when no one else would, had just changed her future. The world had finally heard her heart speak. And it was only the beginning. When Clara arrived for her next shift, the Grand Lion Hotel felt different. The same marble floors gleamed. The same perfume lingered in the air. But the staff whispered in corners and looked at her with new eyes. Some smiled politely. Others just stared. The story had spread overnight. The waitress who saved the billion-dollar dinner. She tried to ignore the attention, tying her apron and getting straight to work. But she could feel the change. People moved aside when she walked by. Even the head chef nodded in quiet respect. Mr. Kenton, her manager, approached with an envelope in hand. His usual stern expression had softened slightly. "Clara," he said, "Mr. Langford, the CEO from last night, has requested to see you this evening. He asked for you by name." Clara blinked. "Me? Are you sure?" He nodded. "You'll report to the private lounge at 7. Wear something neat. The hotel will provide it all afternoon." Clara's hands trembled as she worked. Her mind swirled with questions. What could a billionaire possibly want from her? Was he upset that she played without permission? Or did he want to thank her? She told herself not to hope for too much. When evening came, she was led to the private lounge. A quiet room lined with bookshelves and golden lamps. The city lights shimmered through tall windows. Mr. Langford sat by the piano with a drink in his hand. His tailored suit looked effortless, but his sharp blue eyes carried the focus of a man used to making decisions worth millions. "Miss Rivers," he said, rising to greet her. "Please, sit." She hesitated before sitting on the edge of a leather chair. "I'm sorry if I overstepped last night." "Sir, he raised a hand gently. "Overstepped? My dear, you saved the night without your music. That deal would have fallen apart. You didn't just play notes. You shifted the whole atmosphere." Clara blushed, unsure how to respond. "I only wanted to help, sir." "And you did," he said with a small smile. "More than you know." The two companies were seconds away from walking out. "Your performance reminded them why they came here. To build, not fight." She listened quietly. Hardly believing what she was hearing, he continued. "I've seen hundreds of performers, Miss Rivers, but I've never seen anyone play like that. Where did you learn?" "My father," she said softly. "He was a pianist. He taught me when I was little, but I stopped after he passed away." Mr. Langford nodded slowly, his expression softening. "Loss has a way of silencing music, doesn't it?" Clara swallowed hard, surprised that a man of his stature spoke with such understanding. After a pause, he gestured toward the grand piano beside them. "Would you play for me again?" Her heart raced. "Now?" "Yes, now," he said. "No audience, no pressure. Just you and the keys." Clara hesitated, then stood. Her fingers brushed against the piano lid. It was warm under the soft glow of the lamp. She sat down, took a deep breath, and began to play. This time, the song was slower, gentle, like a confession. It told the story of loss and hope intertwined. Each note trembled with emotion, filling the quiet room. Mr. Langford closed his eyes and listened. His jaw tightened, and for a brief second, Clara thought she saw his composure crack. When she finished, silence lingered again. "That," he said finally, his voice low, "was extraordinary." Clara smiled faintly. "Thank you, sir." He leaned forward. "Miss Rivers, our corporation is hosting a series of global events next quarter. Galas, product launches, charity dinners. I want you to be our official pianist. You'll travel, you'll perform, and you'll be paid well." "Very well." Clara's eyes widened. She almost thought she'd misheard. "Sir, I'm not a professional musician," he chuckled. "Professional or not, your music moved people in a way no training can. That's what we need." She sat frozen, her hands trembling in her lap. The waitress who once hid her talent in silence was now being offered a stage she'd never dreamed of. Mr. Langford stood and extended his hand. "Think about it, Clara, but if you ask me, the world deserves to hear you." She rose slowly, shaking his hand, her voice barely a whisper. "Thank you, sir." When she stepped out of the lounge, the hallway lights seemed brighter. Her reflection in the glass doors no longer looked like a tired waitress, but someone reborn that night as she walked home. The city's noise faded behind her. In her mind, she could still hear the piano. Not the notes she played, but the promise hidden between them. She looked up at the stars and smiled for the first time in years. Somewhere above, she imagined her father smiling back, proud of his little girl who finally found her way back to the music. And deep inside, Clara knew one thing for sure: the world might forget faces, but it never forgets a melody played from the heart. The following morning, Clara woke up before sunrise. She couldn't sleep much every time she closed her eyes. She saw the piano, the lights, and Mr. Langford's calm face when he said, "The world deserves to hear you." It didn't feel real yet. She made coffee in her small kitchen, sat by the window and stared at the sky turning pink. A tiny smile touched her lips. By noon, she was back at the hotel. This time, she wasn't just another waitress. The moment she stepped inside, the staff whispered her name. "That's her," one of the new waiters said. "The girl who played for the billionaires." She wanted to tell them she was still just Clara, still trying to make ends meet, but deep down, something had changed. For the first time, she didn't feel invisible. In the corner of the dining hall, the grand piano had been polished until it gleamed. A single white rose rested on top, placed there by the hotel owner himself. When she saw it, her throat tightened. It wasn't fame or money that made her emotional. It was respect, something she hadn't felt in years. Late in the afternoon, as she was clearing a table, the hotel phone rang for her. "Miss Rivers," the receptionist said, "Mr. Langford's office just called. They'd like you at the corporate tower tomorrow morning for a meeting and a test performance." A test performance? The words echoed in her head. That night she could barely eat. She practiced on an old keyboard she'd borrowed from a friend. Pressing plastic keys that clicked instead of singing, she played until her fingers ached, trying to remember the feeling of real ivory beneath them. When she arrived at Langford Industries the next morning, she was overwhelmed. The building rose into the clouds, glass, steel, and power. The receptionist guided her to a large conference hall where a black Steinway grand piano waited under the lights. Around it sat a small audience, Mr. Langford, his board members, and a woman in a red dress who introduced herself as Amelia Pierce. The company's event director, Mr. Langford, smiled. "Clara, welcome. Just relax and play whatever feels right." She nodded nervously, wiping her palms on her dress. Then she sat down, closed her eyes, and let her hands move. She played a melody that started soft, almost hesitant, then grew stronger, more alive. The notes filled the room like sunlight spilling through glass. Every chord carried emotion, not technical perfection, but truth, the kind that makes strangers forget their titles and just feel. When she finished, the silence that followed was deep. Amelia Pierce blinked slowly, her lips parting in surprise. "That," she whispered, "wasn't a performance. That was storytelling." The board members murmured in agreement, and Mr. Langford leaned forward. "Clara, welcome to the Langford Music Initiative. You'll perform at all our upcoming events, starting with the Paris launch next month." Clara gasped. "Paris?" He smiled. "Yes, we're expanding internationally. You'll travel with our team, all expenses covered. You'll be paid as a professional artist." Her breath caught. "Sir, I don't even have a passport." "Then we'll help you get one," he said simply. "You've earned this." For a moment she couldn't speak. She looked around the room at these powerful people clapping for her, the same kind of people who once barely noticed her while she cleared their tables. That night, as she walked home through the glowing streets, she didn't take the bus. She walked the whole way, smiling like someone who had just found a piece of herself she thought was gone forever. The city lights blurred through her happy tears. When she reached her apartment, she called her mother. Her voice trembled as she said, "Mama, you won't believe what happened. They want me to play, for real. All over the world." Her mother laughed softly on the other end. "I told you, Clara, your music was never lost. It was just waiting for the right ears to hear it." Clara looked at her reflection in the window. Tired eyes, messy hair, and a smile brighter than she'd ever worn. She touched the glass gently and whispered, "I wish you could see me, Dad. I'm finally playing again." Outside, the city pulsed with life, and somewhere in the distance, a street musician played a familiar tune. Clara paused to listen. The melody wasn't perfect, but it was real, just like her own. And for the first time, she realized something powerful. Maybe the world didn't need perfect music. It needed honest music, and that she could give. The weeks that followed felt like a dream Clara never wanted to wake up from. Her life moved faster than she could believe. One moment she was carrying trays through the hotel dining hall, and the next she was being fitted for elegant dresses and flown across the ocean. For the first time in her life, She wasn't serving tables, she was taking center stage. Her first performance abroad was scheduled in Paris. At a grand ballroom overlooking the Seine, the event would host investors, artists, and diplomats, a night meant to showcase unity and innovation. But all Clara could think about was not making a mistake. Her fingers trembled every time she looked at the piano. On the day of the performance, she stood by the backstage curtain, wearing a silver gown the company had chosen for her. Her reflection in the mirror barely looked like the same girl who used to hide her calloused hands in dishwater. The lights dimmed and her heart thudded in her chest. She heard Amelia's voice through the earpiece. "Come but firm. You'll be fine, Clara. Remember, you're not performing. You're telling a story." When she stepped onto the stage, the audience murmured softly, curious. Some probably expected a polished concert pianist, not a waitress-turned-musician. The grand piano gleamed beneath the golden lights. She sat down slowly, drew a deep breath, and began to play. The melody started gentle, almost like a whisper. Each note carried warmth and vulnerability. A confession in sound, the hall grew silent. Even the air seemed to listen. The soft rhythm told her story. The struggle, the loss, the rediscovery of her father's voice through her own. Halfway through the song, she let her emotions take over. Her fingers moved faster, stronger, freer. The melody became alive. It soared, dipped, and wept. The audience leaned in as though afraid to miss a breath. By the time she struck the final chord, she was shaking, not from fear, but from release. For a heartbeat, the room stayed quiet. Then came the sound, soft applause at first. Then rising into thunder, people stood clapping, cheering. Cameras flashed. Clara bowed deeply, her eyes filling with tears. She had done it afterward. Reporters surrounded her, asking how long she'd trained, where she'd studied, what academy had shaped her. Clara smiled shyly and said, "I studied at home. My teacher was my father, and my lessons were love." Her simple words spread faster than any headline. Within hours, social media buzzed with her name. The waitress pianist who played from the heart. Backstage, Mr. Langford found her. His expression mixed pride with something almost fatherly. "Clara, you didn't just play music tonight," he said quietly. "You reminded people why they fall in love with it." She smiled. "I just played what I felt. And that's what makes you unforgettable," he replied. Over the next months, her life transformed completely. She performed in London, Dubai, and Tokyo. Each time the crowds grew larger. But fame never changed her spirit. After every show, she sent money home for her mother, visited hospitals to play for patients, and often returned to the Grand Lion to sit at the same piano that started it all. One evening, she returned to the hotel unannounced. The dining hall was quieter than she remembered. Fewer guests, dimmer lights, yet the old piano still stood proudly in the corner. She walked up to it and ran her fingers over the keys. A few guests looked up, whispering as they recognized her. Clara smiled and began to play softly this time. Something simple and full of peace. Mr. Kenton appeared from the kitchen, wiping his hands. "I should have known you'd come back here," he said with a grin. She laughed. "This place gave me everything. I couldn't stay away." As she played, a little girl in a waitress uniform peeked from behind a table. Watching her in awe, Clara caught her eyes and smiled. The girl blushed and whispered, "I want to play like you someday." Clara's heart melted. She nodded. "You will, sweetheart. Just don't ever stop believing in your own song." When she left that night, she turned back one last time. The sound of her music still lingered in the air like a promise. She realized then that success wasn't about the applause or the bright lights. It was about what her father had told her years ago. Music isn't about notes. It's about heart. And now, after all the years of silence and struggle, her heart was finally singing again. Louder than ever, she had become more than a pianist. She was living proof that sometimes the smallest voices, the quietest people, carry the most powerful melodies of all. Months turned into a year, and Clara's name began appearing in newspapers, magazines, and television interviews. People called her the waitress who played the world. Her story touched hearts everywhere, a tale of humility, courage, and rediscovered dreams. Yet even with fame glittering around her, Clara stayed grounded. She still rode the same old bus when she was home, still stopped to greet the janitor at the hotel, still sent flowers to her father's grave every month. But fame, as she soon learned, didn't come without shadows. Invitations poured in, some genuine, some greedy. Everyone wanted a piece of the woman who had gone from clearing tables to commanding stages. Agents called, companies offered endorsements, journalists dug into her past. Looking for a scandal that wasn't there, Clara found herself lost in the noise. The one thing she'd once loved, her music, now felt like a job again. It was during one of these high-profile events that everything started to change again. Langford Industries was hosting its annual investor gala in New York City. The world's elite were attending, and Clara was to perform the final piece. The event was massive. Hundreds of guests, flashing cameras, elegant gowns, and diamond smiles backstage. Clara felt uneasy. Amelia Pierce noticed and asked gently, "Nervous?" Clara shook her head. "No, just something feels off tonight. The crowd, the cameras. It's not about music anymore. It's about money." Amelia nodded slowly. "That's the world we're in, Clara, but remember, when you play, the world still listens." Clara took a deep breath, stepped onto the stage, and let her fingers touch the keys. The melody began softly, but halfway through, a murmur rippled through the crowd, a commotion near the back. A group of reporters had pushed past security, shouting questions. Cameras flashed like lightning. "Clara, is it true you used to clean tables? Did Langford use your story for marketing?" The noise shattered her rhythm. Her fingers froze mid-air. The notes collapsed into silence. The CEO, Mr. Langford, stood abruptly, gesturing for security. But it was too late. The damage was done. The music was gone. Clara stood up, trembling. The same fear she had buried years ago flooding back for a moment. She wasn't the celebrated pianist. She was just the waitress again. Standing under judgmental eyes without a word, she turned and walked off stage. The room erupted in whispers. Amelia ran after her backstage. "Clara, wait! Don't let them get to you." But Clara shook her head, tears filling her eyes. "They don't care about the music anymore. Amelia, they just want a headline." That night, she disappeared. She didn't go back to her hotel suite. Didn't take calls from Langford or her agent. She took a cab to the outskirts of the city and found a small diner that had an old piano by the wall. The place was nearly empty, only a few tired truck drivers sipping coffee. Clara sat down quietly and began to play. No spotlight, no cameras, just raw, unfiltered sound. The melody that came out was fragile, trembling at first, then rising into something pure. Honest, her eyes closed as she played, and for the first time in months she felt peace. When she finished, there was a soft clap from one of the drivers. "That was beautiful, miss," he said. "What's it called?" She smiled faintly. "It doesn't have a name, it's just home." For the next few weeks, Clara stayed off the radar. She played in small cafes, schools and nursing homes. She told no one who she was. She just played for the love of sound, for the people who needed it most. One day, a little boy in a wheelchair handed her a crumpled napkin that said, "Your music makes me dream again." She kept that note in her pocket for the rest of her life. Eventually, word spread that she had been found, not by paparazzi, but by Mr. Langford himself. He arrived quietly at the cafe where she was playing and waited until her final song ended. When she saw him, she froze. But his expression wasn't angry, it was proud. "I was afraid you'd lost yourself in the noise," he said softly. "But it seems you found the silence instead," Clara smiled, wiping a tear. "I just wanted to remember why I started." He nodded. "Then you're ready to start again, but this time on your own terms." That night, as she looked out at the small crowd who clapped not because of fame, but because of feeling, Clara knew she didn't need a billion-dollar stage to matter. She only needed a piano, a story, and the courage to play from her heart. And in that quiet little cafe, she played again, this time not for power, not for applause, but for truth. The waitress had found her melody again, and the world once more leaned in to listen. Years later, the world still remembered the night the waitress pianist saved a billion-dollar deal. But Clara Rivers no longer cared about headlines. The fame that once followed her everywhere had quieted into something gentler. Respect, not noise. She had learned that true music didn't need spotlights. It just needed hearts willing to listen. After stepping away from the corporate stage, Clara built something new in a quiet coastal town. She opened a small music school called The Hidden Melody, named after the first chapter of her own story. It wasn't fancy, just a converted bakery with whitewashed walls, a few donated instruments and sunlight spilling through lace curtains. But every day it filled with laughter, wrong notes, and the sound of dreams being born. Children came from nearby villages with calloused fingers and shy eyes. Clara taught them what her father once taught her. Music isn't about perfection, it's about truth, she'd say, guiding small hands across the keys. When you play with honesty, even silence listens. Sometimes when parents came to pick up their children, they would recognize her. "Are you the pianist from Paris?" They'd ask in awe. She would only smile and reply, "I'm Clara, their teacher." Every now and then she still received invitations from across the world and to perform at galas, to appear in interviews, to tell her miracle story again. She politely declined most of them, choosing instead to host free concerts for locals. Her favorite performances were those in the old town square, where fishermen, bakers, and schoolchildren gathered under string lights to listen. One warm summer evening, as she prepared for one of those small concerts, a black car stopped outside the music school. An older man stepped out, tall, silver-haired, still carrying that quiet authority she would never forget. It was Mr. Langford. "Mr. Langford?" Clara said in surprise, rushing to greet him. He smiled. "I heard rumors that my favorite pianist had vanished to the seaside. I had to see for myself." They sat inside the small studio surrounded by drawings, broken violins and laughter echoing from the next room. Langford looked around and nodded approvingly. "So this is where you've been hiding all these years?" Clara chuckled. "Not hiding, healing. I think this is what I was meant to do all along." He watched her for a moment, then reached into his coat pocket and placed a small box on the piano. Inside was a golden keychain shaped like a treble clef, engraved with the words "For the woman who taught the world to listen." Clara's eyes welled with tears. "It's beautiful," she whispered. Langford stood, smiling warmly. "You may not play for boardrooms anymore, Clara, but what you're doing here is far greater. You're building the next generation of hearts that understand music." After he left, Clara sat alone by the piano for a while. Tracing the engraved words with her thumb, she thought of her father, of the tiny apartment where she'd first learned the piano, of the night she'd dared to touch the keys in that grand hall, and how one act of courage had changed the course of her entire life. Later that evening, as the sky turned orange, her students gathered in the town square for their performance. The audience was small, families, neighbors, even tourists who stumbled upon the sound. Clara stood behind her students, letting them take the stage. When one of the youngest froze halfway through her song, Clara walked up quietly, sat beside her, and began to play alongside her. The child's hands relaxed, the melody flowed again, and the crowd cheered softly. When the performance ended, a journalist approached her, notebook in hand. "Miss Rivers, may I write about your school?" Clara smiled, wiping a strand of hair from her face. "Of course, but don't call it a success story, call it a second chance story." That night, after everyone left, Clara sat alone at the piano once more. The waves outside crashed softly against the shore. She began to play the same melody she'd played that fateful night years ago, the song that had awakened her life. Only this time it sounded different, gentler, complete. She imagined her father sitting beside her again, whispering as he always did. "Music isn't about notes, Clara. It's about heart." She smiled through her tears, whispering back, "I know, Dad. I finally understand." The night breeze drifted through the open window, carrying her music into the dark, across streets, across years, across everything that once tried to silence her, and somewhere in that sound, the world still remembered the waitress who dared to play, the woman who turned silence into song, and heartbreak into harmony, because in the end, Clara Rivers didn't just play the piano, she played life itself, one brave, beautiful note at a time.